Hey, good evening. Hope you're doing well. Today we're learning Maseches Zevachim Daf Tzadi Daled Amud Beis as well as Daf Tzadi Hey. Yesterday we really ended in the middle of a sugya, and we'll just actually start a couple lines back at the second line of Tzadi Daled Amud Beis. Elo Amar Rava Kol Kibus Teles Lekiskus. If you have any cleaning that doesn't have rubbing, so then Lo Shmei Kibus. And says the Gemara. V'had amar Reb Chia bar Ashi that zimnin sagin habaka imno kame derav v'shichshichelei masane b'maya. The story that Reb Chia said that he saw Rav cleaning his shoes, it must have been shichshuch in aval kibus lo. There was shichshuch, but there wasn't kibus. This word kibus is not the right word. It's really kiskus. So you're allowed to clean it. You're not allowed to rub it, and it's that is how he understands the case. And there's of course the discussion of whether the leather in discussion is soft or hard leather. If we're talking about soft leather, that would be according to everyone that this would make sense. But if it were talking about hard leather, that would be like the shita of acherim that we learned about yesterday. If the principle that Rava is laying down that kibus de lesle kiskus is not kibus, that if you clean something without rubbing, so then why not a beged? If you're saying that rubbing a beged, that the only way to actually do kibus in halacha on Shabbos, Hilchos Shabbos, to do kibus is to rub it in addition to it being wet. So then maybe by a beged I can get it all wet, as long as I don't rub the beged. It says the Gemara, beged, when it comes to a beged, shriyaso zehu kibuso. We're not, as opposed to shoes, when it comes to a beged, the fact that you put a liquid in water, that is what is problematic. So let's say that I have a bucket of water, and something on Shabbos gets dirty, so I take it on Shabbos and I throw it in the bucket. So zehu beged shriyaso zehu kibuso. When it comes to clothing, simply putting it in water is problematic. The Rava l'taime de Amar Rava held zarak sudar l'mayim. If you throw a garment, a handkerchief into water, chayev. And as well, zarak zera pishtan l'mayim chayev. As well, if you put flax into water, in both of those cases, you're going to be chayev. So this all matches with the sheet of Rava that you're right, that when it comes to certain items, we say kol kibus telesle kis kuslo shme kibus, but that's not true by a beged. By a beged, rubbing is not going to be the prohibition. The prohibition will be triggered with a beged, even if one was to put that beged simply in water. Now asks the Gemara on this last din of Rava, where he splits down the middle between the world of a sudar lamayim, where we said chai when we just learned about that by a beged shriyaso zehu kibuso, and then he said, but by flax you're also chai. So asks the Gemara, bishlama sudar avid kibus. I understand when you're dealing with a garment and you put that garment into water, zehu kibuso, got it. I understand why you're chayiv. Elazer pishtan my taima. But if you put flax into water, why would that be considered to be chayev? After all, that's not its way of kibbus. That requires kiskus in order to be chayev kibbus. So says the Gemara, "V'chitem mishum de mikdach." If what you're saying is that if you put the seeds of the flax into the water, it will begin to sprout. Well, that shouldn't only be true of pishtan. Ihachi chiti usa'are nami. It can't be that you're going to be chayev for putting zera pishtan into water because of the fact that it may sprout. That's true of a lot of things. I remember as little kids, we used to do these science projects. I think we used to take a potato and we would like hang it in water somehow with toothpicks on the side of the cup and it would start to sprout stuff out of it or some other things that we did, some recollections. So it can't be that that would only be true by flax. So it says the Gemara, Hanach, that when it comes to the zera pishtan that's put into mayim, why is that aser? Because islahu riri, it has some type of discharge that comes out of it that binds together all of the zera pishtan, and that is lisha. What is the definition of lush? It's taking particulates and turning them into one. Let's say you have flour and you add water and you're stirring it. When all of the particles of the flour become one, or when any of the particles of the flour become one, you violated Lisha. So it says the Gemara, Zera Pishtan, when you put it in the water, what happens is that there's this exudate, there's this discharge that makes it all sticky. That's Lisha. That's Lisha. Says the Gemara, Ihachi, if that's true, shlachim nami, even certain pieces of leather, they might stick to each other because that's true by leather. Also, Rashi details this on the side. Says the Gemara, no. Hasam ka'avid lisha. Over there by the pishtan, they stick together and they're it's lisha. They're not really separable. By the leather, they may get a little stuck together, but it's not lisha. The pieces of leather are too big. It's not like small little particles that are all being joined. Good. Says the Gemara, Darash Rava, mutter lechabis min al b'Shabbos. He says it's mutter to clean a shoe on Shabbos. Amar le Rav Papa le Rava, v'ha'amar Rav Chia bar Ashi. Hold on 1 second. It's mutter to clean a shoe. Zimnin sagin havakim nekame de Rava, shechshiche le mesane b'maya, shechshuch in aval kibus lo. How could you say, Rava, you're allowed to be mechabes a shoe? You're allowed to clean off a shoe, but not through kibus. You can only pour water on leather or whatever that minimal amount of washing is, but you are not allowed to do a full kibus. So then Rava said, you're 100% right, I recant. We're a third of the way down on Tzadi Dalet Amud Beis. The Gemara says, Hadar Uki Rava Amora Alei V'darash. Rava picked a person to be his Amora, and then he gave a drasha. This is well known. We've seen this throughout Shas probably 50, 60 times, that the way that a Rav would give shiur is that he would speak his words to the person in front of him, to the Amora, and the Amora would then be the billowing voice that would carry across the room. So what did he say to his Amora, to his loudspeaker? Dvarim shamarti lifneim tosheim biyadi. I taught you something, but it was a mistake. I made an error. Biram kach amru. Really, this is the halacha. Shechshuch mutter, kiskus aser. That's the right way that one should clean a shoe. Is that you can clean it off. You just can't rub it off. You can put water on it, but you can't rub it in order to clean it. Good. At the 2 dots, about halfway down, hakibus b'makom kadosh, our Mishnah, and yesterday's blot taught us that when you do kibus, it has to be in a holy locale. And immediately, how do we know the Tana Rabbanan? The pasuk says in Vayikra Perek Vav Kol Asher Yigabiv Sarah Yikdash VaAsher Yizemi Dama Al HaBeged Asher Yizeh Aleh Techabes B'Makom Kadosh. Black on white. Obviously, the pasuk says that you can only do kibus, this cleaning process has to be done only in a holy place. Shviras Klei Cheres Minayin. The Mishnah told us that if you have a Kli Cheres that became Tameh, it also has to be done in a holy place. Says the Gemara, how do we know? Talmud Lomar, this is a pasuk also in Vayikra Chav Aleph, it's the next pasuk. Uklei Cheres asher tivushal bo yishaver. Meriku shtifa b'klina choshes minan. How do we know about cleaning out these copper kalim? Talmud Lomar, the pasuk says, Klina choshes b'shalom murak v'shutaf b'mayim, has to be cleaned out. Meriku shtifa. We had also said at the end of our Mishnah that zeh chomer bechatas. We said that there were some unique aspects of halacha that applied to a chatas that didn't apply to other types of korbanos. So it says the Gemara, Besuleka, I can show you more than the chiddush that you highlighted in our Mishnah. There are other things that are mechudash about a chatas. After all, ve'ika shenichnas dama lifnim, not lifnai v'lifnim, but lifnim. And a very important diuk. If you bring the blood of a chatas into the heichal, as we've learned many a time, it becomes puzzle. So says the Gemara, so then that's a chumrah too. Says the Gemara, well, maybe not. Perhaps bechatos hachitzonios. Here we need to look on the side because there are some girsa changes. Says the Gemara, it should be bechatos hachitzonios ka'amrinan. We're talking about only chatos hachitzonios. Says the Gemara, including the girsa change. Chitzonos nami she'im nichnas dama lifnim psula. What are you talking about? We're not talking about chatos pnimios. Chatos nami, that chatos chitzonos is when you bring the one from the outside into the heichal. That's when it becomes problematic. So says the Gemara, perhaps we're talking Rabbi Akiva, where really you thought that was a chumrah that applied by a chatos, but let's remember a shita that we've learned before. What does Rabbi Akiva hold? The Omar kol damim shenichnasu laheichal lechaper psulin. It's not just a chatas. That's not a chumrah that's true by the chatas. That's not true by other korbanos. Because according to Rabbi Akiva, it applied to all. Aye, there's a chumrah by a chatas, and the word should be here v'ha'ika. V'ha'ika shekein mechaper nal chai ve'krisos. We know that a korban chatas is mechaper on chai ve'krisos, that it has the capacity to undo kares. That's a massive chiddush that we're able to undo that through a korban. So says the Gemara, yeah, but it could be that we're talking about bechatas to shmias kol. This is a particular type of korban that was a chatas based on a false shvua. It was a korban ola v'yored, and that particular one was not mechaper on. That particular one was not mechaper for a for chai v'krisos. What about shkein tu'una arba matanos? Maybe we should say that there's something unique about a chatas, that it requires arba matanos, it requires 4 blood applications. Says the Gemara, no, also not a chiddush by a chatas. K'Rabbi Yishmael, damar kol damim tun and dalad matanos, because he held, according to Rabbi Yishmael, that all scenarios require dalad matanos. Very good. Al dalad kronos, the chatas has to be on all 4 horns. Says the Gemara, Ulatamech, according to you, I could give you a whole punch list of things that are unique about a chatas. Ha'ika keren has to be on the horns. Ha'ika be'etzba. Etzba has to be done with, the blood application has to be done with a finger. Ha'ika chuda, it has to be put on the actual corners of the mizbeach, so that your one blood application on the chuda, on the pointed part of the corner, the 90-degree angle of the corner touches 2 sides. Ella, it must be that our Mishnah was just listing chad mitrei tlasa. Chumrei nakat. It's only listing 1 out of 2 or 3 different chumras that it could have listed. But taka, it's true that there really are more chumras that apply by chatas that don't necessarily apply to other korbanos. The Mishnah says 15 lines or so from the bottom, 12 lines from the bottom. Beged sheyatza chutz leklayim. Let's say that there was a garment, and the garment was ta'un kibus, and the person took the garment out of the makom kadosh. So shiyatza lechutz leklayim, it was taken outside of the curtained areas or outside of the azara. So the halacha is that you take the beged that's ta'un kibus and nichnas umechabso b'makom kadosh. So let's get our timeline straight. You're inside the azara, you do a maisa, and you get blood on your clothes. You're a kohen. Let's just review and summarize some of the halachos in one sentence. It's blood that's ra'oi lahazah, and that blood drips on your garment, and now it's ta'un kibus. Then you take the garment and leave the azara area, and then you remember, oh no, this is ta'un kibus. So the halacha is that you would then have to go back inside the holy place and clean it. What if the garment only became tamei chutz l'klayim, nitma chutz l'klayim? So then you have a problem. Koro, you first then have to tear the garment so that it's no longer a garment, and then nichnas, bring it into the holy place, umechabsa b'makom kadosh, but you can't bring it in without tearing it. Good. All that is about a beged. What about a kli cheres? A kli cheres that had to be broken. It already had a din that it had to be broken. Sheyatza chutz l'klayim, and then you brought it out of the curtained area, namely you brought it out of the azara. Nichnas, you bring it back in. V'shavra b'makom kadosh. It has to be broken in a holy place. Good. What if the kli cheretz wasn't? What if it didn't become tamei in the azara, but rather nitma chutz l'klayim? It became tamei outside the azara. So then, in order to bring it back in, nokvo, you have to first poke a hole in it or drill a hole in it. Then v'nichnas, then you bring it into the holy to the azara, and then v'shavra b'makom kadosh. You have to make a hole. So we've spoken about a beged and we spoke about a kli cheres. Now let's talk about a kli nechoshes. How do we know about a copper utensil sheyatza chutz l'klayim? Let's say that we knew already that it was tamei. So it says the Gemara, and it needed marika ushtifa. So what if you took it out of the makom hamikdash? You took it out of the azara. Says the Gemara, nichnas, you bring it back in. Umarko v'shotva b'makom kadosh. The marika and shtifa has to be done in a makom kadosh. What about nitma chutz l'klayim? What if the klei nechoshes only became tamei outside of the azara area? So then pochso, then you make it not usable. You make a significant hole in it. V'nichnas, then you bring it back into the azara. And umarko v'shotva b'makom kadosh. End of Mishnah. 6 cases in the Mishnah. One about a beged that became tamei inside was brought outside. The other case where it became tamei outside. The second case was talking about the second set of cases was kli cheres that became tamei inside and was brought outside. And then the next case was when it became tamei outside. And the same is true with klei nechoshes, is that what if it became tamei inside, and then what if it then only became tamei outside? The Gemara says, Maski Floravina Koro, I don't understand. If you tear the garment, beged amarachmana, vela begedu. It's not a beged anymore if you tear it. So says the Gemara, the Meshayar Bakadei Ma'afores, is that you tore it, but you left over this small amount that is the size of a Ma'afores, which is like a handkerchief, a very small garment. Says the Gemara, Eini, that can't be true because V'amar Avuna, Lo Shanu Ela Shaloshir Bakdei Ma'afores. The type of tearing that we need to do to bring the beged of the Kohen back inside that became Tameh, that's Ton Kibbutz, is that it has to have no garment left that size. Everything has to be cut and torn smaller than that. Aval Shair Bakdei Ma'afores Chibur Habit, that's considered to still be a whole garment. So that doesn't work because in order to bring it in, you have to tear it down. Says the Gemara, turning to the top of Tzadi Hayamad Aleph, Midrabanan, that's only, we're talking about Midrabanan. Rashi, Dibra Mascha Midrabanan. Gzeira. We have a midrabanan. We say that it's problematic if you leave over the ma'afores. That's that appropriate size. Dil malo asya lemikra ruba, because we're afraid that you might end up tearing 51% of the garment. Aval midoraisa tahora umuter lachnisa mishum mitzvahs kibbutz, but it's allowed to bring it back in because of kibbutz. I kli cheres sheyotza. We said you have to bring it back, but when you do, you have to make a hole in it. So says the Gemara, kli amar rachman v'lo kli. If you have a little hole in it, so then that's not a kli anymore. Says the Gemara, shenikev b'shoresh katan. It has a tiny little hole inside of it. In other words, as Rashi points out over here, that it can't hold liquid anymore. But what can it hold? Pretty much anything dry. If you have a very, very small hole in a kli, you can still store golf balls in there. You can store strawberries in there, no problem. Strawberries aren't falling through the hole. The hole is a couple of millimeters. It's no big deal. It's like a drill hole. Big deal. It's no longer a proper kli cheres because it has a hole, but it can still store other things. What about kli nechoshes? Sadi ham and olive, 3 lines down. Poch, so we said we have to make a big hole. Ay v'halav klihu. That's not a kli anymore. Says the Gemara, you did make a hole in order to bring it in, but the ratzif martzifle. But it's the kind of martzifu. It's the kind of hole that if you were to hit it with a hammer, that's what Rashi says in Dibra Maschil, the ratzaf le mirtzaf, 6 lines down. Rashi says, umeshani, the answer is that you hit it with a hammer. Achar shepochso make alav bekornas umechabro v'chazar shem kli alav. You do make a hole in it, and then you hit the metal. If you hit the metal and the metal flattens out a little bit more, then the metal spreads a little bit more because it gets thinner and thinner. Then you can cover the hole, and then you've ruined it and made it whole again, and then you can bring it back in. Amar Reish Lakish. What about me'il shenitma? The me'il, one of the garments of the Kohen Gadol that became tameh, and you then took it out of the makom hamikdash. So machniso bepachos mishalosh al shalosh umechabso. You are not allowed to tear it because the pasuk says mishum shenemar lo yikareh. That can't be a torn garment. So what you do is you fold the garment in such a way where the dirty part of the garment is visible, and then you just put that tiny little bit over the threshold into the makom hamikdash and you clean it. That's how you would clean it. Mosiv Ravada Barava He'ovin deharachin. If you have very, very thick garment, or harachin, very, very thin garment that's very small, ein bahen mishum shalosh al shalosh. The halacha is that it's not considered to be usable as a patch. So the din of shalosh al shalosh doesn't really help you one way or the other because it's not usable. So says the Gemara, that's not true. Agav avihen chashivi. It could be that when it's connected to another garment, that it is considered to be chashuv. That's what Rashi says over here, 3 lines into the wide lines. Agav avuhon kshu mechubar bebeged chashuv gimel al gimel didei. It is considered to be a beged chashuv if it's attached to a garment and used in a meaningful way, even though it's not really usable as a patch. Ay, v'haboy, we have a problem. V'haboy shivas samimonim. We need to use 7 different cleaning agents when we do kibbutz. This is not something that we've learned yet. When we are talking about something that's ta'on kibbutz, it needs to be cleaned with 7 different things. But there's a problem because, says the Gemara, the Amar of Nachman bar Amar Rabba bar Avua, Dam chata sumaros negoim, tzrichin shivas samamonim. The blood of the chatas that gets up on a beged in his ta'on kibbutz, or the maros negoim, they need 7 samamonim. And what is one of the liquids that's used as a cleaning agent? Urine. The Tanya, Ela she'ein machnisim meraglayim b'mikdash. So we have a big problem. The whole Mishnah we're talking about is that when if it's ton kibus and it goes outside of the makam mikdash, you have to bring it back in. We have to clean it. The problem is that urine doesn't belong. Meraglayim doesn't belong in the makam mikdash. Turning to the top of Tzadi, hey, Amid Beis, and Amir Hashem will learn about 2/3 of the way down, and then we'll stop almost at the end of the short lines. V'chitema, if you want to say that perhaps the Meiraglayan is batil, perhaps it's the mivla b'hubahad shiva samamonim. Maybe it's absorbed within the other 6, so it's just one of the 7, but it's a mixture of all 7. Uma'aber lehu lekulu kechad, and we take this mixture of all 7 liquids, and now it's this wonderful cleaning agent. Says the Gemara, that's not how it works. V'hatnan ha'aviran shelo kesidran. If you use the cleaning agents out of order. O shehevir shiv'asan ke'echad. Or if you'd use all 7 liquids that are all poured together at the same time, lo asa velo klum. That's not how we solve kvisa. When we have a din of ta'on kvisa by adam chatas, you cannot solve this problem by having all 7 liquids together. And if that's true, we're back to our question. How can you clean in the makam hamikdash with mei raglayim? Ein machnisin mei raglayim b'mikdash mipnei hakavod. So says the Gemara, if you want to say, okay, so the urine wasn't mixed with all 6 other ingredients, but perhaps it was mixed with one other ingredient, and maybe it's batal midoraisa. Says the Gemara, that's not correct, because there's a Mishnah that says that the Sheva Samimanim that were used for Kvisa, each one was used 3 times individually. So the first of the Sheva Samimanim was used 3 times. Get rid of it. Then they used the second cleaning agent 3 times, and then the third. So we see that each cleaning agent was used individually. Therefore, we're back to our question again, which is that Mei Raglayim should not be brought into the Makam HaMikdash. Ella, says the Gemara, the mivla behu berok tafel. It was coupled together with some type of saliva. To Amar Reish Lakish, rok tafel tzarach sheyehei im kol echad be'echad. For each of the 7 cleaning agents, each of them was coupled with this rok tafel, this specific type of saliva, and that is what made it functional. And therefore, the mei raglayim was mixed not with another cleaning agent, but it was mixed with rok tafel, and that nullified it from the status of mei raglayim, but didn't ruin its capacity to clean as one of the sheva samimanim, and therefore it is the answer to our question as to how mei raglayim could be brought into the mikdash. Says the new Mishnah, 8, 9, 10 lines down on Tzadi Hayim and Beis. In regards to kalim that we've cooked in them, the klei nechoshes that need to be cleaned out. So says the Gemara, that's true if you cook in it. It's also true if you are ira l'socha roseach. It's true if you pour a liquid into that kli. Meaning, the kli is either used directly for cooking, or a cooked item is poured into that kli. Even though that second version of pouring a hot liquid into the kli is a lesser version because you're not boiling the pot itself, it's being poured from another pot. Nevertheless, it's considered enough cooking that we have to do the marika ushtifa in a makom kadosh. And as well, echad kodshe kodshim ve'echad kodshim kalim tu'unen marika ushtifa. It doesn't matter what type of korbanos you were doing. They could be kodshe kodshim or kodshim kalim. They all will need to have marika ushtifa because remember what we were concerned about, that if the nechoshes, if the copper kli absorbed the food, then there's the din of lina, and by the time the blios hit the morning, in most cases, in some korbanos it's the next morning, then we have a problem. So we had to do marika ushtifa. Now, whereas the Tanakama holds that Kodshe Kodshim and Kodshim Kalim both were Te'un and Marika Ushtifa, Reb Shimon Omer Kodshim Kalim Ein Te'un and Marika Ushtifa, a shita that we saw a couple of blot ago on Daf Tzadi Gimel. There it was in the context of discussing Truma, but here it is just being quoted in its natural source here. Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis have a brisa for us. Asher Tivushal Bo, Ein Li Ela Shebishal Bo. I only know that marika ushtifa is required when you cook in the copper kli. Ira lesocho roseach minayin. How do I know, like that the Mishnah is correct? How do I know that if I were to pour something boiling hot into a kli, that receiving kli would also need merika ushtifa? Talmud lomar va'asher bo yishaver. The word tivushal should be removed. This is what the pasuk actually says and makes a lot more sense. Good. Says the Gemara, Boy Rami Bar Chama, I have a kasha. Tala'o be'avir tanur mahu. Let's say that there was a kli that was nechoshes, and the food that I'm cooking in it was on a spit, and it never really touched the kli itself. It just cooked in the air. So what would be the din? Do we say, and we're a third of the way down, Abishal ubiluahu de kapid rachmana? Maybe we're only talking about formal cooking, where something's cooked in a liquid medium in a pot, or bilua, some type of cooking that would lead to absorption into the walls of the kli nechoshes. That's what the Torah is makbid on in order to do mariko shtifa. Odilma, perhaps abishal below bilua. Perhaps cooking, even if there was no absorbing, maybe that would also be the case. So says the Gemara almost halfway down, Amar Rava Tashma. Let's see if we can figure this out from a brisa. Echad shebishel bo, ve'echad she'ira lesocho roseach. What do we see? That if you cook in it, or if you pour into it, then it's boiling. Balua shelo bishul lo kami boilan. Absorbing, everyone agrees, is going to require marika ushtifa. Ki kami boilan, bishul below balua, mai. The only case we're talking about is where something is hanging, something is tilo. It's in the airspace, but it's not touching the walls. So Tashma, let's see if we have an answer. To Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Rabba Baravua. Tanur shel mikdash shel mateches haya. An oven that was in the Makam HaMikdash was made out of metal. Ve'isal kadaitach bishul below balua lo kapid. If you want to say that cooking without contact of the walls, namely hanging it there, is not a problem, so navid shel cheres, then we should have had the Beis HaMikdash oven be made out of cheres because it would never have gotten tameh because we weren't worried about it. Elamai, the fact that it was made out of metal shows us that we are concerned about something like that. Says the Gemara, that is not a good argument. Kevan deika shiur menachos to afyasan betanur. No, because we have shiur mincha that are cooked, they're baked, I should say, and they're put in the oven, they're put on the wall. Vika bishalu bilua avdinan shal mateches. One thing is, you can't argue that way. The fact that it was metal doesn't mean that we're not concerned about something that's tilao, about meat that's hung in the airspace as to whether or not we'd require mariko shtifa. Not a good argument. Says the Gemara 2/3 of the way down, there was an oven, and they greased the oven with animal fat. So animals are flesh. So what's the story here? Asra Rabba bar Ahiloi lemechle lerifta laolam. He said, forever and ever, from now on, this oven cannot be used for bread that would stay pariv. All the bread would always be fleshik. Even if you were to clean out the oven. What was our concern? That you may end up eating this bread with kutach. Kutach was a dish of kind of this curdled milk and bread. Kind of disgusting, but that's what they used to eat. We were concerned that they might have taken bread from this oven and they would have dipped it in the kutach, and that would be aser because it's basar b'chalav derabbanan. So therefore, what do we see from here? That once you've greased an oven with animal fat, you're done for. No fix. That's very odd. Meisvei, we have a brisa, and this is a brisa that we've seen before. Ein lashin es ha'isa b'chala. We have a general rule that we don't make milchik bread. L'maisa, we make milchik bread as long as it's evident that it's milchik bread, but in general, we don't make milchik bread. V'im lash, and if in fact you did need milk into the dough, kol ha'pas kula asur mibnei hergel avera. We are concerned that because people are accustomed to eating bread at certain meals, we don't want you to have basar b'chalav. Kayotzebo, similarly, ein tashnes ataner ba'alya. Similarly, you should not layer an oven with the fats of a tail, which is flesh. V'im tash, and if you did, then kol hapas kula asurat sheyasik es atanor tiyufta deraba bar ahiloi tiyufta. What do we see over here? That there is a fix. The previous sheet of the Gemara The Gemara seemed to say, in the name of Rabbi Bar Ahiloi, is that the bread is asur la'olam. You're never allowed to make bread in that oven anymore. Why would that be? Why can't we kasher the oven? And says the Gemara, we see from this brisa over here that that as long as it says kol pasas kula asura ad yasik esatanur, burn it out. We have libun, just burn it out, and then everything is fine. And with that, the Gemara rejects that shita, tiyufta, drababar ilai tiyufta, because that is in fact how we paskin in almost all cases, that we are able to do libun and we are able to clean out our ovens. One interesting psak that I know Rabbi Robinson holds up, because I spoke with him about it, is that if for those of us who have warming drawers in our homes, he holds that they can't be kosher because there's this like funny middle of the road usage of them, especially if you use it during the week. During the week, they have a very, very high setting. On Shabbos, we use it in a medium setting, but it's still very, very hot. It's Yad Solet Espo, but the intent is never to cook. So it's this funny middle of the road approach, and in such a case, we don't allow for that. But in a general oven, we can just turn it up to what we would call 550 degrees, whatever it is, for an hour, and it burns everything out. That's libun, probably even considered libun cham, or certainly libun kal, and that's what we would have said in such a case. We'll stop right here on the last of the short lines, and Amir Hashem pick up on Shabbos with Omar Lei and learn Daf Tzadi Vav and most of Daf Tzadi Zayin. Wishing you all a beautiful night.